Hello, everyone. I'm Val Hawkins, Chair of Agenda Alexandria. As we enter our 24th season, I'm honored to represent Agenda Alexandria, our community's premier organization that explores the issues that confront our city without taking sides. In fact, our motto is taking a look without taking sides. Today, we have an exceedingly timely and critical topic of interest uh, to and confronting thousands of people and families in Alexandria and all around the country: education during the pandemic. We'd like to thank our program sponsors for the year: Simpson Properties, Donnie Simpson, Homes of Alexandria team of Compass, Bobby Bomar and Ellen Patrick, and then our sustaining contributors: Janet Hoffman with Synergy Home Care, Jay Hoffman of Hoffman Properties, Homes of Alexandria, Team Compass, Bobby Bomar and Ellen Patrick. I'd like to also, we'll back up there. Jay Hoffman, former police chief David Baker, and Linda App and Steve App. We want to recognize our board members who worked to put together this program today: Janet Barnett, Eileen Ahern, Henry Brooks, and to Shad Thomas, our moderator today, who spent a tremendous amount of time working with what we feel is going to be an outstanding group of panelists assembled for the program. And thanks to Ricardo Alfaro, our vice chair and producer of this program. We are most appreciative, again, of our panelists who've graciously given their time and thoughts to address this important subject. Chad's going to introduce them after this message.
Good afternoon and welcome to September's panel for Agenda Alexandria. My name is Shad Thomas and I'll be the moderator for the panel as we look at education during the pandemic. Back in March, when COVID-19 started impacting our communities, education went to virtual. And me personally, for my household, my wife and I have 4 young kids, 3 that are in school. And so it was a big change for us to adjust to that, to go from in-person learning to virtual. And I remember talking to my wife and saying, this is just temporary, a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. By September, surely the pandemic will be gone and we'll be back to school in person. Well, as we know, as the summer progressed, the pandemic didn't go away. The virus was still there. We got to August and everybody was talking about, well, are we going back in person? It's going to be virtual. Is there going to be a hybrid model? Well, those decisions were, as everybody can understand, they're tough decisions. Each one brings its challenges. And today we're fortunate to have 2 of those leaders in our community, leaders of our schools, that were on the forefront of those decisions. We have Dr. Gregory Hutchings Jr., the superintendent for Alexandria City Public Schools, Principal Daniel Cinalli, the principal for the Basilica School of St. Mary. We also have 2 other panelists giving you a perspective of our households, of our families during this time. We have Jesse O'Connell over in Delray representing the perspectives of a parent. And we also have Bridget Aduwadiye, and Bridget's a senior at TC Williams. Thank you so much for the panel for joining us today. I want to kick it off with Dr. Hutchings. Dr. Hutchings, can you give us a background on Virtual Plus, how that decision was made, and where we stand today?
So absolutely. First, I just want to thank you, Shad, and also Agenda Alexandria for even having us here today. As you mentioned earlier, this is probably one of the most unprecedented times I know of my life, and probably everybody on this panel's life as well. And we are like entering uncharted waters. And I wish that, I've said this time and time again, that I had a superintendent's playbook that I could use. But this is a time where every decision and everything that we're doing, it's a learning experience, and we have to really grow through our decision making and be able to pivot and adjust and refine as we move forward. So first and foremost, I have to say that with our Virtual Plus learning approach, part of us going in this direction was not because we thought it was the best decision in the world, because honestly, virtual learning is not the best learning practice for kids. It's just not for all students. Some kids thrive, but every student doesn't. So it's really just not best practice. But we knew that this was what was most feasible with the circumstances and the situation that we were in. And what we specifically had to look at were the constraints for trying to have an in-person instruction. And specifically, we looked at transportation, we looked at staffing, and then we also looked at the facilities just in general. And specifically with transportation and getting students to and from schools, with the CDC guidelines that we are required to adhere to, our buses went from a 77 passenger bus to a 14 passenger bus, which means it is going to be an extreme challenge to try to get students to and from school and still meet those CDC guidelines. And that was one of our constraints that we're trying to work through. How do we conquer or overcome that particular obstacle? We also had to look at the staffing piece. And as you all know right now with COVID-19, that many of our families and community members and staff members included, some do have immune systems and that are compromised in some way. Some have childcare needs of having to be at home with their own children. Some have spouses or family members who are in their homes who may have some form of compromised immune system, and it's a challenge with trying to get 100% of our staff to be able to come back to school. Even if they were willing, it's difficult to get 100%. So another constraint that we're having to work through is, what does the staffing look like in order to be able to have in-person instruction and still meet those guidelines? Because even though we would love to have our kids back in school, meeting those guidelines with 6 feet apart will not warrant us having 100% of our students back, even if all of our staff were willing to return, because we wouldn't be able to adhere to those guidelines. And then the final piece is really looking at our facilities, making sure we have the appropriate air quality in our buildings, making sure that we have the appropriate PPE or personal protective equipment to ensure that even if on a given day, if every student didn't come in, we have to be with their PPE. We have to be prepared to offer students with that PPE so that there isn't a barrier in regards to making sure that masks are being worn and all the appropriate shields and things of that nature are in place. So this is, it's a huge endeavor that, I wish it was so easy when I get emails from our families and from our community. Dr. Hutchins, just open the schools, just make it happen tomorrow. I wish if it was that easy, trust me, it would have been done. I would have already done that. There's always an implication for whatever decision we make, but we'll be able to talk more about that later on in today.
I appreciate that, Dr. Hutchings, and thanks again for your leadership during this time. I know a challenging decision. Now that we're a couple weeks into school, what are your biggest challenges you've seen so far during the first few weeks?
Well, today was actually our first kickoff for our Virtual Plus Learning Advisory Team. And this was an advisory team that consists of teachers at all grade levels from pre-K through 12th grade. And we also had district leaders and principals, and we had 2 school board members and 2 student representatives from our school board who were also a part of these meetings today. And some of the concerns that came out of Virtual Plus is the time of synchronous and asynchronous learning, that's a challenge depending on the grade level for some of our students. Also, some of our students in their home environments, they may have other obligations and other responsibilities in addition to learning, whether it's watching younger siblings, whether it's not having enough space in their homes or an appropriate location to be able to be assessed or to have a discussion. We even had discussions today around just screen time, for especially our youngest learners, but really all of our students in general. And then having video cameras on or off. Sometimes I believe we forget that everybody's home environment is very different. Some of our kids, they don't want to show their households. Some of our teachers don't want to show, where they may live, or staff members where they may live. And us really developing, like, what is this Zoom culture or Zoom etiquette, and what's most appropriate, for our schools. And I think some of the challenges that we are being, torn with is some of the attendance requirements that the state has required us to do. We are required to still adhere to compulsory attendance requirements, which is a challenge for us because, and this is why it's so important for us to meet these compulsory attendance requirements. Our funding for the school division from the state is based on our attendance. So if we don't have people in school, we don't get that per pupil dollar amount, which means our funds could be decreased from the state. So we have to do everything within our power to try to have our students attending and checking in and making sure we're taking attendance, so that these reports that go to the state will provide the appropriate attendance numbers so that we can receive our state funding and that it is not reduced in the future. So that's another area that we're just kind of torn with. And I'm going to be talking with our state superintendent next week. We meet weekly, now bi-weekly, with the state superintendent. And I'm going to be sharing with Dr. Lane that, this is bringing some challenges with our school division in particular. The attendance requirement, and us just having a little more flexibility with that, I think will help. But those are just some of the immediate challenges that we've been talking about. One positive thing that many of our staff members shared during our call today was that we are seeing our kids make adjustments. I'm glad that we waited purposefully until week 3 to have our first advisory team meeting, so that we actually had some data points and not just the first couple of days where everybody was adjusting. And what they were saying was that kids are really adjusting. There's still hurdles along the way. Don't get us wrong, but our students are being able to adapt and adjust as we move forward. And we're going to be polling all of our families and our staff members this Friday, which we intentionally waited to the last, to the end of the third week, excuse me, so that they could also have some data points and things to share with us when we poll them.
I appreciate that. I wanted to shift gears over to Principal Cinalli and get your perspective, Principal. St. Mary's made the decision to go in person back in August. Can you walk us through that decision and how it's going so far?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Again, thank you for hosting this event and inviting me to be a part of it. So the Basilica School of St. Mary is a Catholic school, a parish school with the Basilica of St. Mary here in Old Town Alexandria. We're a part of the Diocese of Arlington, which is a grouping of Catholic schools that go all the way from, the border of Virginia and DC all the way down through the border of the Diocese of Richmond. So we do have a superintendent and a central office that helps us with policies and procedures. We are accredited by the Virginia Council for Private Education, which works with the Virginia Department of Education. But similar to what Dr. Hutchings says, we're not necessarily always bound by the exact same guidelines of the Virginia Department of Education. So the Virginia private schools were allowed to, label an intent to vary from the CDC guidelines. And so the Diocese of Arlington schools, our superintendent and our central office, working with Bishop Burbidge, decided that, our schools, if they wanted to have in-person education, could have the distance between students go down to 3 feet if the students and the faculty were all wearing masks on their face, whenever that separation cannot be at least 6 feet or more. So with that intent to vary, we kind of went through a lot of the same policies and procedures that Dr. Hutchins talked about. We looked into our classrooms, into how much space can really be used, how can we actually use some different spaces, some meeting hall spaces, repurpose them as classrooms. We surveyed our parents and mentioned, with this new arrangement, students maybe being less than 6 feet apart, wearing masks all day, would you rather have them come in person or go online? We talked with our teacher leadership team about how they felt about it and our sort of ideas and options that we had. And so it did seem like, our community and our teachers and staff and our parents especially were really desirable for that in-person education. So we did, figure out that our community was behind it. It was something feasible and safe that we could provide here at our school. And then we went forward with it and communicated that to our community and our parents. We also actually have an online option. So we have, one class per grade level. We're a 3-track school, so we have 3 classes per grade level. One of those classes is designated as the online hybrid class. So we have students and families that have some high-risk members in their family, or even the students are high risk, and those students are allowed to stay home and attend the class virtually every day via Zoom. And so that teacher is actually teaching some students in the classroom and some students who also happen to be learning from home. To help facilitate that, we hired 3 new online virtual liaison teachers, which basically help make sure, it's almost an online teacher's assistant or instructional aide. There are actually some veteran teachers that we pulled to help with the instruction to make sure those students that are at home are able to get all the extra helps and resources they need for a really fulfilling education, just as if they were here in school. So it was a long process. A lot of discussions went into it. We did our best to plan as we could with the information that we had back in June and July and early August, while we're trying to plan for a return to school in September, which, as we all know, is incredibly difficult to do with the current dynamic and how quickly information changes about the pandemic. But thus far, it's been a good start to the year.
Principal Cinalli, what percentage of the families did opt for that online education versus in person, roughly?
Yeah, great question. It was about 17% of our total school population. So we're about 700 or over 700 students, so about 120 or so, 130 opted into the online. We saw the majority of that number came from our middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. However, there are some grades in the lower level that have more than others.
So now we're a couple weeks into your semester. What challenges have you seen so far with in person, and also with that hybrid model with the folks that are virtual?
Well, I have to say, in person, I really have to credit our students and our families for the resiliency of the kids. There was a lot of concern with having the students wear masks all day. I mean, we have a designated mask breaks where the teachers can go outside and give them some fresh air, and the students have opportunity to spread out and take the masks off whenever it's safe to do so, per those CDC guidelines, like we said. So that was an anticipated difficulty, which actually ended up being a happy surprise. We have a lot of new procedures when it comes to arrival, dismissal. We don't, all those events or all those parts of the school day used to have students gathered in large numbers, and now they no longer do. So repurposing some of those and redesigning some of those procedures is really difficult at the start of any school year, certainly so in this case. So that has smoothed out, but certainly was a difficulty. And then for our teachers that are teaching the students in the classroom and online, that took, the first week, now we just finished our second week and have started our third week, took a lot of conversations about what is it realistic that our teachers can actually offer these students, these online learners at home? What is it realistic for their pedagogy, that what they're able to deliver here educationally and academically? What's realistic about the social interaction of those students at home with the students here in school? And then what's realistic about our teachers' efforts and how much time it requires to teach students and prepare sort of an online curriculum while at the same point preparing lessons for students in class. So we've had a lot of good conversations, and we've been, as flexible as we possibly can be and adapting and modifying to make sure that this can continue to provide a high quality education that our parents expect of our school.
Thank you, Principal Cinalli. I wanted to shift over to Jesse O'Connell. Jesse, thanks so much for joining us. Jesse's a parent over in Delray, has kids in ACPS. Jesse, can you give just a description of your household and your family and how you're managing virtual education so far?
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate being here today. We have a 5-year-old at Hawkins House Daycare in Old Town, and we have a 2nd grader at MBCS. And, I want to start by saying that the perspective I'm bringing to this as a parent today is, I'm someone that has been fortunate enough to work from home during this pandemic with a spouse that can work from home as well. And we have, both a surplus of financial resources and time. And the challenges and the experiences that parents are facing throughout the city are far from uniform, right? There's a huge variety. On this panel day, we're not going to hear directly from parents that have students with individualized learning plans, or parents with English language learners, or parents that have to leave the home because they have a job that requires them to go in for a shift and whatnot. So the perspective that I'm going to be sharing, it is highly specific and candidly probably not the most important perspective as we kind of go through how our city is going to have this cohesive educational experience throughout this crisis. But, I do think there are some things that are pretty much universal to all parents right now. All parents are really tired. All parents are really distracted. Parents are really mad, right? Like parents feel let down by educational leadership at pretty much any level we can imagine, right? The federal government for not coming forward with consistent additional emergency funding that could ease the transition to virtual learning. The state for prioritizing opening certain things like bars and indoor dining that made going back to school in person even harder. And, the local district, I think, there's the piece in the Post today, Dr. Hutchings, you talked about how the plan was kind of late and people were emailing like, what's going on? What's going to happen? So I think what we're seeing is all of these choices and decision making feel like they've been pushed off onto parents. Do you send your kid back to school in person or not in the case of our private schools? Do you form an instructional pod with your neighbors or not? Do you quit your job or change your hours so you can help out at home or not? And all of these choices feel some combination of impossible and inadequate and just wrong, no matter what it is that you're left to do. So I think the biggest feeling is that, and I think what we should all constantly remind ourselves is just because a lot of people are making this work doesn't mean that it's working. And we should be continually looking to revisit what it is that we're doing.
Jesse, what is particular for your kids' education, your kids' experience? What are you concerned about for them as far as socialization or anything on that aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question, Shad. I think I'll start with something Dr. Hutchings teed up already, through this conversation they had this morning, reflecting on the first 2 weeks. I do think it's a lot of screen time, right? I think the trying to translate what looks like a typical in-person school day to a remote experience has left particularly younger kids in a circumstance that is super unfamiliar to them, which is to like sit still and look at a screen for a while and try to stay focused and try to not stay tired. And we've definitely observed that on our end. I think the socialization is a huge concern. I know, particularly, again, thinking about our younger students, especially kindergartners, that have not had the chance to actually like meet their teachers or meet some of their new classrooms. And, can we get to some way of having them gather in person so they at least get to know each other and can start to form some of those social connections? I'd say a huge concern is, this is certainly not on teachers. And I should also point out, teachers are another perspective we're not hearing from directly today. And their experiences are going to be overlapping in some ways from what each of us share, but also different in other ways. And I think they're absolutely trying their best, but the software is insane, right? Like so much instructional time gets reduced to this 15-minute description of first log into Clever and then go to Canvas and then find your homeroom and then scroll down and then click this and then click the Zoom link. And that's not on the teachers. I just think there are real challenges in the user design. And even when it works in a vacuum with one student, we have so many households that have multiple students and they're just getting constant emails and communications and it's all blending together for parents. So I think kind of continually revisiting, how are we communicating to families? How are these software platforms helping or candidly hurting the learning experience? That's definitely a challenge that I've observed firsthand, and I hope we can continue to kind of have on the list of things that we're really prioritizing.
Appreciate that perspective, Jesse. I wanted to transition over to Bridget. Bridget, thanks so much for joining us, taking some time out of your day. You're a senior at TC Williams, and I couldn't imagine being in my senior year and not being able to see friends. You're in this college admissions time period, so it's just a challenging time, not able to probably visit those schools on campus, do a lot of virtual events. But can you start out, Bridget, just by introducing yourself and describing your family?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on. I'm Bridget, and the perspective that I bring to this panel is, a student who obviously interacts with teachers and kind of has a feel for how they're faring during this time, but a third parent figure in my family for long before the pandemic. I'm the eldest of 4 kids, so I've spent most of my life helping to take care of my younger siblings. Been doing that, since before I even started school. And I think for me, the big shift has just been not just a big sister and a mentor and a babysitter, but now I also have to, help out with the teaching and the learning. Like Jesse O'Connell said, it's been really difficult helping them to navigate to their Zoom links and just trying to get them to focus, even though they have all this screen time. And, for me personally, it's also been a struggle. I do work along with going to school. So just, balancing those family responsibilities on top of, I do work remotely as well as in person, and just balancing all of that has been a real challenge for me on top of college applications. This admissions year is definitely going to be different because we don't have the opportunity to visit colleges or talk to our counselors in person and really have that individualized, you know, aid that we need to pick the right college and to just wade through all the applications and financial aid. And, as a first generation, college student who's going to be the first to go to an American university. And, I have immigrant parents who, don't know what the college admission system is about. They don't fully understand what a GPA is, to begin with. It's really been, even more of a struggle to understand all of that myself and explain that to my parents. This is why you have to fill out these forms. This is why the FAFSA is so important, especially now with the pandemic, and my parents have been impacted financially. It really is up to me to really help my siblings as well as, help my future and set a precedent for the rest of my family, because, going to college is really going to be important for us in changing our financial trajectory and just setting a precedent of, education in this country. So for me, this pandemic has definitely impacted my future. I've heard a lot of frustrations from my friends about how they had this specific plan of what they were going to do. They were going to do their SATs. They were going to do college tours. They were going to do all these things. And then the pandemic hit and they didn't know what to do. And, when you have this clear roadmap laid out for your future and you had all these plans that you were excited to do, and then all of that has just been taken away from you and you don't know how to control anything anymore, it's just really, it really reinforces that sense of helplessness and powerlessness you feel as a young person who can't vote, who can't work most jobs, who can't really drive. And now you have lost the little control that you had over your future due to this pandemic. So I'm really here trying to represent the students as best I can with my unique experience. So,
Bridget, I appreciate that, and that's a great perspective, and I can understand certainly what you're going through. As far as helping your siblings, can you go into that a little bit more about your day-to-day as far as you managing your responsibilities as a student in your senior year, also having a part-time job, and then also just helping out with your siblings?
yes. So I guess I can just walk through asynchronous Monday since we have a lot of assignments due on Monday. I usually spend my mornings helping my little brothers to complete their assignments. And then from about midday, late morning to early afternoon, I try to do my own homework myself. And then I reserve my afternoons for my freelance projects that I work on since I am a freelance writer. And then I go to my in-person job on the weekends. So I do try to follow that schedule, but I'm not very good at following it because, kids, they tend to throw that off. And then there are, shenanigans that happen that you need to help out with. I do help my mom with the chores and my dad goes to work. So I really am having to step in for my mom a lot of the time. And I mentor my little sister on her schoolwork since she's in middle school. And she's been struggling through some classes as well. She's had some technical difficulties with her Chromebook. So getting that worked out on top of trying to figure out my schedule and, make sure my brothers are taken care of and that they're not left alone at home is challenging for me. But I definitely want to say that it has been a learning experience. A lot of what teachers have been saying is that this is kind of like college where you manage your time and you have these classes and then you have breaks in between those classes to do your own thing. So it definitely is difficult. There have been a lot of tears shed on everybody's end, on my brother's end, on my end, on my parents' end. It's been really a challenge for us trying to balance that family dynamic, but I hope it pays off in the end. So
I appreciate you sharing that, Bridget. And we'll come back to you a little later, but I wanted to get back to Dr. Hutchings. Dr. Hutchings, as far as moving ahead, and I know you mentioned reevaluating after 3 weeks, we're at this point coming up here, to go back to in-person education, what factors on your end will determine this?
So thanks for that question. Even before I answer, I just want to say, Bridget, I am just so proud of you because one, to see a student that has taken on so much at such a young age, that's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot for adults, and you are doing it with grace. And I mean, I'm just really proud of you. Just sitting here listening to you speak and talk about your future and going to college. Any college of your choice they're going to be exceptional because you say yes to them, not that they've said yes to you. So I want to make sure I write your recommendation. So send me some information so I can write your college recommendation. In regards to, what was your question, Shad? Because now I'm off task because I was thinking about Bridget.
I was actually trying to beat you to writing that letter recommendation too, because it was certainly really good perspective from Bridget, and we appreciate all she's doing during this time. And there's a lot of other students out there doing the same thing, and it's great to see our high school students, our senior students stepping up. But back to Dr. Hutchings, I wanted to ask about kind of moving forward. What do we look at for in-person education?
Yeah, so what we're doing is, so specifically, I talked to you about the Virtual Plus Learning Advisory Team, and that's just one aspect of kind of like the criteria we're looking at to go back to in-person. One, I don't even have a date for in-person. I wish I could tell you like this is going to be the date. I would be lying if I told you what the date is. I don't know, right? And when we do come up with the date, it might change. You know, we have to be understanding to know that that's possible. But what we're doing every 7 weeks, we will be reevaluating kind of our situation to determine if it is now feasible to move into the actual in-person, and also how does that work? So we already have a transition plan, and that's available on our website. So that was all done over the summer. The summer we had to focus on what does in-person look like and what does virtual. I mean, we recommended virtual because it was most feasible, but we already have the plan on how a transition into in-person will look, and we're going to be looking at the things that I mentioned earlier, the transportation, the staffing, the facilities. But one additional component in going back that we will be reviewing is what does the city statistics look like in regards to COVID-19 as well. So we will be getting insight from our Alexandria Health Director just to have an understanding of how does the curve impact ACPS. You know, is this the right time to transition? These are the types of questions that we're going to be asking our health director here in the city of Alexandria. So all of these things will be occurring between now and October 15th. October 15th is the date that we will be sharing with the board what our recommendation is for the second quarter. You know, we only made a decision for the first 9 weeks of school. So on October 15th, we will be able to share kind of what the next 9 weeks of school will look like. In the meantime, this month, we have been evaluating and analyzing a transition potentially for some of our students with special needs, because what we're finding is that in-person instruction can afford just a more robust educational experience for students with special needs. Not that we can't serve them virtually, because we're serving them now virtually, but we could provide just a more robust experience if we were in person, especially for some of our most vulnerable students with special needs. We've also been having conversations around what could a transition look like for our youngest learners, and that's pre-K through second grade. So we're having that discussion now on what that could potentially look like. So this week, we are polling our families with special needs to find out if they're willing to send their kids into the schools, if we're meeting the safety precautions like CDC guidelines, social distancing, mask, things of that nature. We're also polling our staff because that really is going to be one of the key determining factors on how feasible it can be. You know, even if we went into a situation with, you know, by law, we can say a staff member has to come to report to school, right? But then we can go into legal implications with forcing people to come back to school, and that takes months to go through. So, you know, we want to try to start with who's willing first, And then let's see, once we get the numbers of who's willing, well, what numbers will that look like for our students? So these are all the things that we're working through. And October 15th, we'll be sharing out more specifics with our community.
Thank you, Doctor. I wanted to kind of also ask you a question on something that keeps me up at night, something that's concerning, is this education gap. And do you think virtual learning, how do you think is that gonna widen this education gap that we have?
I really think it depends. I think that I think it might narrow a gap for some kids. So for example, some of our students are actually in some cases doing better now virtually than they were doing in person. And for a number of reasons. Some had, just issues in school. Some people don't need the socialization piece. And they're better off being in their more familiar environment, like their home, and they're actually excelling at a faster pace. But then we have some students who do need that additional, support that is just not, possible with the virtual world. We are still able to do kind of our student support team meetings. We're able to do IEP meetings. We're able to have psychologists meet with students virtually, our social workers to meet with students virtually, our, remediation specialists to meet with students virtually. But some of our kids, if the virtual world is just not the right means for you to learn, that is going to exacerbate that learning gap for that particular student. So that is something that we are going to have to really work with. And in October, we're doing an assessment of all of our students just so we can get an idea of where they are academically. We wanted to first allow people to get through the motions of just pivoting to virtual plus, right, to this virtual plus world because it's new. So we wanted everybody to get comfortable with figuring out, okay, where's my location going to be? Where's my routine going to be? How am I going to get all of my technology, issues under control? So then when we get into October, we're able to really assess them without all the extra baggage that comes with us starting this virtual plus piece. And then we can begin to do individualized plans for students and how we support them moving forward. And then also we'll have some clear data on what the learning gap looks like, that's more specific than looking at previous data that's kind of old. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the current data.
Thank you, Doctor. I want to transition over to Principal Cinalli. And Principal, going back to you, if a teacher or a student does test positive for COVID-19, what measures are taken there at St. Mary?
Yeah, great question. It's a question that we obviously had to have a pretty specific plan in place for and actually report that plan to our diocese and the Virginia Council for Private Education. I do want to give a lot of credit to the Alexandria City Health Department. They have been incredibly cooperative and communicative and really partnering with us on developing our plan and making sure that no matter what happens here with us on our school, they will sort of partner with us to give us guidance and their recommendation and help with contract tracing and things like that. So we have a great resource right down the street and anytime on cell phones, which I really have appreciated. So anytime if we have a person on campus that tests positive, so it could be a student, could be a faculty member, we have totally eliminated parent volunteers and our contractors now come in off hours. So we have really tried to limit the amount of adults and people that are able even to come onto our campus. But if one does test, we find out that one was positive for it, we're going to let the Alexandria City Health Department know. They will then activate their contract tracing. We will basically quarantine the classroom and anybody that came into contact or close contact with that positive person for the recommended 2-week period. We'll have 1 day of no instruction, and then the following day we'll start with what we've already published as an online distance learning schedule. That 1 day will give our teachers and our administration time to hand out devices to our students that might need to be, borrow a device from the school, and then we'll hit the ground running with the online instruction that following day, quarantine the classroom, anybody else that came, the whole classroom, whether they were within 6 feet or further than 6 feet away from the student, will still, or the teacher or adult that tested positive, will still quarantine the entire room for the 2-week period, and then other people that may have come in close contact as well.
Thank you for that. As far as your demand for enrollment at school, once you made the in-person decision, did you see an increase in demand or a decrease in demand? I was just wondering from a education standpoint, from an enrollment standpoint.
Sure. So we're pretty blessed is that we're a sought after school. So we always are on a waiting list for many of our grades. But yes, once we did make the announcement, or specifically Fairfax County, I would say when they made their announcement about going full virtual, we did see a big increase in interest and applications. However, our total enrollment based on the start of the summer to where it was after we announced our return to school plan is down. So we have a very long wait list, a much larger wait list than we're used to. However, I capped off any new enrollments just for the sake of social distancing and keeping the students apart as much as possible. So our enrollment is a bit down. However, I would say that yes, interest here in our school went up greatly. And I know at a lot of the diocesan schools, a lot of applications and interest and enrollment did go up as the counties announced their virtual plans.
Appreciate that. And how is the staff members, parents, you mentioned a little bit, but the teachers, are they supportive of this? I mean, I'm sure there's some with concerns that, I'm a little concerned about coming into school in person versus virtual.
Yeah, it's exactly what you would think. Some of them have their own kids that are enrolled here at school, and they want their kids in school. They want to get the in-person education. Some of them really struggled with going through the spring. We were fully virtual all through the spring, like all the public schools, and they really struggled with having to teach, whatever grade they may be, fully virtual. So they wanted to come back and they wanted to teach in person again because that's what they're used to. So there was certainly a lot of faculty and staff that wanted to be back here in the building. But of course, there were concerns as we announced the plan and communicated with the teachers, some of our staff saying, I'm not comfortable with that, or I'm not comfortable with it for this reason, or I'm high risk, or my family member's high risk, or, I'm in a certain age demographic. That's very concerning here to be in a room full of students. So what we did was, communicate our plan. All of our teachers have a space at the front of the room, plexiglassed off. They're wearing masks, they're wearing face shields, and they are at all times able to be 6 feet away from the students for the mass majority of the day, unless they have to walk and specifically get near a student for some direct instruction or some direct help. So they do all have a space where they can be at least 6 feet apart, still plexiglassed off with the full PPE on hand, with all the students wearing masks as well. And that really allayed some concerns. We did have some staff that still weren't comfortable coming back, and we were able to find some positions for them virtually to keep everybody still employed, which is a real blessing for our school and our community. All the parents that had concerns, they certainly voiced them. They reached out to me with emails, with phone calls over the summer, which I'm very used to, and I'm sure Dr. Hutchings is extremely used to as well. And so I did my best to be as communicative and receptive and work with them whenever I could. But that's why that online sort of option that we offered to our community was such an important part of our return to school plan. The Diocese of Arlington, didn't mandate that schools had to offer an online component. Many of the schools did come back 5 days a week, full in-person instruction with no online component or online option for their students. So the Diocese of Arlington actually created a new online Catholic school. So that it's called, St. Isidore of Seville. Any student that wants to attend a parochial or Catholic school and get a Catholic education can now do so virtually, which was started by our superintendent's office. So some of the other schools that did go back to just in-person education, take it or leave it, you can withdraw your child and maybe we'll see you next year. They have the option now of that online Catholic school. But having the online option for our school allayed a lot of the concerns. We were able to, give our parents the option of in-person or at home, which really fixed a lot of the issues.
So far, are you concerned a little bit that potentially the folks that are online are going to be missing out on a lot from the students that are in person?
I wouldn't say so. Thus far, it's been a great start to our school year, and our teachers are doing a great job doing their best to more or less teach the kids in the classroom and then look back at the camera and teach the students pretty directly there. We have, like I said, those online virtual liaison teachers. So for some of our younger grades, they're doing small group instruction virtually. So the academic side of it, I've been pretty pleased with what our teachers have put forward here. The social aspect, of course, is the concerning part. Our teachers are doing a good job of giving the students at home some time to interact with the students in the classroom and to interact with one another as well in their Zoom meetings during the school day. It sort of remains to be seen what the long-term effects may be, or if there are some shortcomings or some deficiencies that develop. Our plan allows our parents to decide to opt into in-person education or the online option every month. So our first month is now just ending, and our parents are now designating if they would like to come back in for the next month or 6 weeks, or if they want to go virtual for that month or 6 weeks. So there is some flexibility with us on that.
I appreciate that. I wanted to transition over to Jesse. Jesse, did you consider these learning pods are popping up? I'm sure most folks are aware of those, and I'm sure families are thinking about joining a pod or already have, or have you thought, did you guys talk through as your family to join a learning pod?
Yeah, it's a great question, Shad, and it certainly was, something that I know a lot of families spent a great deal of the summer thinking about and reading about, and we all saw trend stories in national newspapers about it. We were very fortunate. Our next door neighbor has a member of the household that's a Spanish speaker, so she's working with the neighbor's kids and my daughter and somebody down the street, and that's been very helpful to kind of have that additional supervision in the mix. But I think your question, I want to take it up a higher level, which is to say that no family is going to fit neatly into the box of just K through 12 education. And that's largely been the thrust of this conversation today, right? Chad, you mentioned you have younger children. I certainly have younger children myself. Early childhood education has been decimated by this public health crisis, right? Since March, 60% of childcare centers in the state of Virginia have closed. So families are scrambling to figure out how to get care and supervision for their smallest children in a way that is safe. And obviously that's drawing attention and time away from what they're able to do in their home with K through 12. And then the other end of the spectrum, I think Bridget already spoke beautifully to some of the challenges that students that are either looking at a transition to college or are already in college are facing, right? Students, there are college students that are still here learning virtually themselves. Our city has college students that have gone back to their campuses and are now caught in these outbreaks where they're being confined to their dorms. And I'm sure their family members here at home are very worried. So I think no one is able to bring their fully present selves to this education conversation because at every single point in the spectrum, there is a pressure point and there's something that everybody's trying to manage and deal with. And I think that's really an important thing to hold and center as we talk about this, what does education in this moment look like? Because it's not really going great at any level of our educational system.
Thanks, Jesse. Dr. Hutchings, what's your thoughts on learning pods that are popping up throughout the community?
I've expressed that families, they have to make, whatever choices they need for their families, right? I will not step into anybody's household to tell them what they should do for their child, which is right or wrong. And because I don't want anybody to do that for me, because we have our 2 children at home too. So what I will say in regards to the learning pods is that, it's important that we understand that there could lead to some inequities in regards to education. Something that started, and this is just a history around learning pods. So I'm speaking beyond just today and what we're doing now. Learning pods and that concept was developed when schools began to integrate back in the 60s across this country. And these learning pods in private schools were developed so that children would not have to, in some cases, not all private schools, so I'm not speaking for all private schools, but that's why I wanted to make that correction, because some private schools were founded way before the 60s. But anyway, in some cases, these learning pods were developed to keep their kids from having to go into an integrated community. And it was also to allow families who just had more financial means to have a lot more direction, and they can kind of have more responsibility in regards to their child's learning and more control over what their children were being able to do. You fast forward to 2020, when we bring this same concept into place, which we're not in, trying to integrate schools. That's not our issue right now. Our issue is trying to ensure that all students receive a high quality education, even if it's in a virtual world. And you have these learning pods that are established by only our families who have the means, and in circles where you just know somebody who happens to hire the teacher or happens to be on the same block. We're now, eliminating other students from having those similar opportunities. Now, families will say, but that's my prerogative. It's my choice. It's my money. It's my circle. And I get that, right? But we can't negate the fact that that will lead to future, gaps in regards to learning experiences that students may have. Now, does that mean to not do it because of that? That's your prerogative to do it. What we have to do on our end is make sure that we're providing some additional supports and opportunities for students who may not have the financial means to be able to have some of these, learning pod experiences, and that we have to develop them or that concept, and not necessarily a learning pod, but that concept, so that students who are underrepresented or students who are, a part of our low socioeconomic, status, that they are still able to be afforded similar opportunities.
Thanks, Doctor. And I'm going to go around to everybody and ask for final thoughts. But before I do that, Dr. Hutchings, I wanted to ask you about mental health. And that's something we did a full segment on this back in May or early June during the pandemic. Certainly for students, for teachers, this is a challenging time. Are there any resources or anything available for those folks that are challenged during this time from a mental health perspective?
Yes, I think the mental health is definitely a concern. That's for not just our students, but also our staff and our parents. I just think of the fact that right now, people who've never experienced any mental health challenges, you're in the home with, and things that you may have, enjoyed doing before that you can no longer do. It could really ignite some mental health challenges. And what we're doing as a division, and it was recently featured, nationally, is some of our work with really assessing where our students are mentally. Our social and emotional needs of our kids, they have to be met in order to even get to the educational component or see any learning happening. So we are making sure that our SSTs, which are our student support teams that consist of social workers and psychologists and counselors, that we are working with our teams. And we're also having our staff really to just keep not necessarily, it's more difficult because we're virtual now, but we are making sure that our staff is just monitoring kids and their moods and their feelings. We're having our learning circles or what we call our community circles, where our students are able to really speak out and talk about their day. And hopefully kids over time will feel comfortable sharing, I'm just having a problem adjusting, or I'm having some challenges right now at home, and things of that nature. But the mental health of our kids, it really is one of the things that I fear the most, because kids who, when we were in school, that were having mental challenges because of their certain home life situation, they're now in that home life situation all day, all the time. And that is a significant concern, because we can't monitor the same way we could when they were coming into the building, because unfortunately some of our kids, they are in homes where they are being abused. And school is typically a place where we can identify and we can notice some of the changes. And a lot of times we're some of the first responders to that. And it's very difficult to do that in a virtual world, but we are trying to just adjust and try to make this student support, team initiatives work in this virtual world today.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchings. Bridget, I'm going to go around and ask for final thoughts. We've got about 5 minutes left. And Bridget, if you could start with you. Thanks again for joining us today. We really enjoy your perspective, you sharing that. Any final thoughts as we're moving forward?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to, I really try to advocate for student voice in my work and my writing and in my art and other things that I do. And I just really hope that, this pandemic has taught us the importance of young people and all of this, and their resilience and their ability to adapt. And, I just hope that that's recognized, and that, as we continue with this online learning, and whether or not we'll be able to go to in-person, the TC Bowen's name change and all of that, I just want to go back to a really poignant quote that I would like to reference in Dr. Hutchings' opening of the op-ed that the school board student representatives published a couple weeks ago. And he talked about how it's time for, him and the rest of his generation to get out of the way of the younger generation and to really let the students lead. And I think this pandemic is really an opportunity for young people to really take on, their own opportunities and elevate their own voices. I'm definitely going to do that as I continue writing for the local newspaper and other publications. And, my heart goes out to other students who are struggling through this pandemic. I am, and, I'm here to listen to you and to hear your voice. And, I just hope that the class of 2021 has fruitful college admissions results, even though it may seem hopeless and very uniquely frustrating right now. I totally understand as a minority, first generation college student with high financial need, it's definitely going to be really difficult. But, we have people looking out there for us, and it's really the opportunity to advocate for ourselves now more than ever.
Bridget, those are fantastic final thoughts. And, you're stepping up to this challenge, and it's obvious. And we appreciate what you're doing. So appreciate that. Thanks again for joining us. Jesse, I'd like to go to you. Any final thoughts from a parent's perspective during this time?
Yeah, Shad, thank you. I was really encouraged at the start of this conversation when Dr. Hutchings talked about how they have this group that is meeting to continually evaluate what is going on and see what's working and what is not working, and is willing to think about making changes to this plan. And I certainly know that that's what parents want to see, that we had a plan to start, and maybe some of it has been working, and maybe some things have been going pretty poorly. And that the district is ready to be responsive to that and change, I think is really important. And Dr. Hutchings, if you yourself have not yet had the chance, or members of your leadership team have not yet had the chance to sit in on some of those kindergarten and first grade classes, I'd really encourage you guys to do so you can kind of actually see what that experience is like. I want to return to the discussion about pods turned to what I think was important, which was Dr. Hutchings was talking about. Really, we're talking about equity here, right? We're talking about equity of the experience, and kind of, I think pods are a great example of the tension between equality and equity, right? And candidly, pods are an issue of both. But ACPS has done a great job of sort of distributing computers, right? So we're having an equitable experience in terms of hardware. But connectivity is still an issue. Pew was out with a study just last week that showed that 50% of low-income families that have students in virtual school right now are experiencing at least one challenge with connectivity, whether that's having to do homework on a cell phone, whether it's not having access to Wi-Fi in the home, or not owning a computer themselves. So I think that's the type of issue that I really want to see all of our educational leaders paying very close attention to, because sometimes that stuff doesn't show up in the data, right? There may be not, they're not logging in, but we're not sure what that reason is. And continuing to press and continuing to make sure that we are seeking equitable solutions, which for some families may mean they're getting extra stuff and more experiences and more attention from the district. I think that's what's going to make sure that our community comes out of this on the far side healthier and kind of more cohesive, and to ensure that we keep those gaps in attainment where they've been and even start to close them.
Principal Cinalli?
Yes, thank you, Shad. First, I just wanted to echo Dr. Hutchings' praise for Bridget earlier. Bridget, very impressive. And if you're a model and example of what Alexandria City Public Schools can produce, then obviously things are going quite well over there. So kudos to you. I look forward to kind of being a part of the world hopefully you will one day be leading. Shad, I appreciate you having us out here. I know this has been an incredibly difficult situation for the Basilica School of St. Mary, I know all of the schools in the Diocese of Arlington. We have a lot of sort of leeway with decisions that we can make and how we can form what's best for our own school and our own community. I think similar to what Mr. O'Connell said, is that I did my best to always go out and get feedback and hear from our parents and hear from our community on what works for them, what do they need, and then once again, what can we provide. I think all of us, sort of will always agree that if we can provide something for our students and our children, then we should do our best to provide it for them and not be withholding. So thus far, we've had a good start to our school year, but the plans that we made from earlier in the summer was, predicting a pandemic a few months down the road, and now we'll be continually reevaluating and gathering new information and making the best possible decisions that we can going forward for our community and our school. And that's going to require a lot of flexibility and a lot of patience and a lot of understanding from our parents and our communities all over. If it was easy to have all the answers right now, I'd certainly love to share them. But we're all sort of just going as we can, gathering the information, and then deciding what to do from there. So I appreciate you giving us a chance to share what we've been doing. And I look forward to kind of tackling some new decisions and some new opportunities as we go.
Thank you. And Dr. Hutchings, final thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say, one, thank you for the opportunity to serve. And I hope that what we can take from all of this is that we don't try to go back to how things were, we were not doing everything right prior to the global pandemic, and for us to strive to get back to not doing everything right is not important. I think we need to start thinking about what is possible for the future and how can we ensure that when we talk about equity, and specifically racial equity, that we can ensure that every student, regardless of their circumstance, including their race, that they are able to go out and to do anything they choose to when they leave Alexandria City Public Schools. And it is going to require our entire community to come together. And especially during this time, I really believe I take this moment as a test for all of us to make sure that when we say we believe in our school division, we say we believe in public education, that we want the best for our children, that we take this moment to really provide the grace, the patience, and the innovation that it is going to require us to make it through and to grow through this global pandemic. So I just ask our families to continue to have that. We are going to make sure that we are consistently monitoring our progress. I always say we're not afraid to make changes. I really believe that when we begin to make changes, we're now making changes from the experiences that we've had because we're all in uncharted waters. And I just hope that you all will continue to give us the grace, the patience, and allow us to be innovative as we make decisions on behalf of every single one of our kids in Alexandria City Public Schools.
Well, thank you, panelists, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to the audience. It was a fantastic learning experience. I hope you guys got the same out of it as I did. This concludes our September 2020 program, and we'll look to see you next month in October. Have a great week. Thank you.